It was May of last year and I had just signed a lease on a new house. It turns out the refrigerator was not the subject of a deal. I will spend most of my money on the house. So I started looking for a cheap one at garage sales. I haven't found any way this way. Therefore, I miss Craigslist. After only 10 minutes, a person appeared not far from me. I called the number and a nice woman answered. She said the refrigerator was still for sale, but she couldn't guarantee it would still be there when I arrived. So against my better judgment, I asked him about PayPal and sent him $75. She sent me an email confirming that she had received the money, and we set a date for me to pick it up. That Saturday I texted him to let him know I was on my way. The house was a beautiful ranch-style house probably built in the 80s. I knocked on the door and this hot girl with brown hair and a very short haircut answered. After choosing fieldwork, I asked her about Sunny, and she said it was her and took me inside. I have no reason to worry. Just like the outside, the house is well finished and smells clean. We chatted for a few minutes until a tall guy, at least 6'5", covered in tattoos, appeared from the kitchen. She introduced me as John, her boyfriend, and told me he was going to take me to the refrigerator. She disappeared behind the house, and I never saw her again. John led me through the kitchen to the garage door. He opened the door and pointed to the refrigerator. He was in front of me, almost sitting against the high door. I could barely see it because the garage was so dark. I asked him if he had a light, but he said it was broken and they hadn't had a chance to fix it. It's not serious. He had to open the high door so I couldn't get out. Anyway, I asked him to pick it up, but he said it was also broken. He apologized. I was just about to present it to the House of Commons. This upsets me, but I have no other choice. Right now. There was a bit of light coming from inside the house. It must have done that. I took 2, maybe 3 steps into the garage before realizing there was plastic on the floor. I looked down and saw it covering the entire floor. That's when I started to worry. I don't see any reason why I should be there, except that I would stop walking. John's shadow began to get closer. Then in the left corner I heard shuffling. Everything in me speaks of leaving. Suddenly I turned around and quickly went back to open the door. I was surprised that John was so close to me, but I continued. I snuck up to him and said, I left the stroller in the truck and I'll be right back. Not far away there was a cart leaning against the wall. He pointed at it and was about to say something, but I didn't stop. When I was sure he was no longer behind me, I ran the rest of the way to my truck door. I jumped in and out of there. I don't know what happened after that. I received a few messages from Dawn, but posted them without reading them. When I got home, I logged on to Craigslist to report them. I was shocked to see that the list was gone. I looked around for another 30 minutes to make sure they deleted it immediately. I also called the police and reported it. They seemed a bit skeptical about my request but promised to check. I never heard from them again and I didn't care. I'm alive, and that's enough for me. For the $75, I have no chance of asking for a refund, and it's not worth getting involved with these monsters anymore. Since then, I haven't gone there anymore. The whole system seems dangerous to me these days. Anyway, a week later I got lucky and a thrift store in my neighborhood had a used refrigerator. It cost $100, but it's much nicer than this one, and it serves its purpose very well. And in conclusion, I don't want to mislead people. I don't think Craigslist is dangerous, and it's free. Thousands of people collect their belongings every day without any problems. But after what happened to me, I don't think it's worth it. However, if you find anything on the site, just be careful. Bring a friend when picking them up if you can meet in a public place during the day. But more importantly, use your head, and the situation may seem fuzzy and could be the difference between life and death. It was around this time last year when I decided to use Craigslist as a means to sell a few things I had to get rid of. My house was getting cluttered and I planned to get some new furniture, and with winter right around the corner, I wanted to get these things out fast. The main piece I was selling were these 2 lounge chairs in my living room. They were really big and a bit outdated, but still fully functional and didn't have any stains or rips on them. It only took about half a day for a few responses to come in, but 2 of the 3 gave me lowball offers, so there was really only one guy who was serious about buying them. He wanted to take a look at them after work that day, sometime around 6 or 6:30 I thought. I of course agreed, just happy to get them out quickly. Now usually I'd try to meet up somewhere public, but honestly I didn't have a way to transport the chairs, and even if I did, I don't think I could lift them myself anyway, I reasoned, so I sent him my address. Come 6 o'clock, I turned on the front porch light and opened up the curtains on the windows. then sat in the living room on my phone while I waited for them to show up. I remembered. Probably 20 minutes passed before a truck pulled into my driveway. They took a few minutes before getting out and walking up to the door. I said hi and let him in, I recalled. He was an average-looking man, late 20s or early 30s, wearing typical work clothes. His name was Matt, and he started up some small talk, telling me about why he was excited about getting the chairs and everything. The guy seemed really nice, and I felt relieved that this would be quick and easy, I thought. We walked around the chair and sat in it and seemed to enjoy it. We talked about price, and he was good to give me what I listed it for, but just as we were about to exchange cash, we both heard a car door slam shut. It sounded like it was right in the driveway where he'd parked his truck, I realized. Matt quickly went outside to check on it, and I just watched, not really sure what was going on. I looked through the window and there were no other cars out there, so someone had to have been messing with his truck. A minute later, Matt came in clearly angry and said someone stole a bunch of stuff out of his car, I recalled. I could tell that he was not so trusting of me, like he thought I had something to do with it. I obviously didn't, and I said that, but he was right to be skeptical, and I was also right to be skeptical of him. I still didn't know if this was some kind of setup, but before anything could be worked out, we heard footsteps quickly approaching the front door, I remembered. We turned and looked over, seeing a guy in a hood push the door open and step inside my house. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked nothing short of insane. He stared at us, standing just a few feet away, looking like he was in a complete state of rage, I recalled. The guy was young though, only a kid, maybe 18 or 19 years old, but still dangerous nonetheless. Both Matt and I stood still, trying to not provoke anything to happen. But then Matt started telling the kid to take it easy. He held his hands up and took a step closer, but the kid was quick to pull the weapon out of his pocket and aim it right at him, I recounted. Yes, it could have been fake, but there was no way to tell, and from the way the kid was acting, I really don't think it was. He yelled at Matt to walk out the door, and now in shock he did as he said. The kid then followed him out of the house and held him at gunpoint the whole way to the truck, I continued. I watched in terror as he pulled out and drove away, obviously outside of Matt's will. As soon as they were gone, I called 911, then ran to my car and tried to follow them while describing what was going on to the operator, but they were gone. I couldn't find any sign of them, I admitted. The police ran an investigation, using the information I had to quickly identify who Matt was and his truck's license plate. Over the next couple days, I was just waiting for a call, but that call never came. Both Matt and his truck still have never turned up, I sighed. I feel guilty, like I should have done more, but everything was so risky, and I likely could have lost my life as well. And even in those final moments of the interaction, I didn't know for sure if Matt was in on it as some sort of elaborate plan. I don't know what that kid wanted, or why any of it happened. It's been almost a full year though, and I don't think it's likely that anything more will be known, I concluded. I stumbled upon a Craigslist ad for a beautiful antique piano at an unbeatable price. And these types of pianos can be unbelievably expensive if the seller knows its true value. I emailed the seller and he quickly replied. He seemed friendly and said he was excited to meet me and show me the piano. The address he gave me was a bit off the beaten path, out in a rural area outside of town, but I didn't think anything of it. Thursday evening, right on schedule, I hopped in my car and started the drive out there. It was already dark and the winding roads were getting more and more questionable as I went along. I was quickly becoming unnerved. When I finally reached the address that he had given me, it looked like an old church. I guess I just didn't know the difference between an old farmhouse and an old church though. They all kind of looked the same in my mind, so I thought that's what it was. I saw the man walking out of the front door waving at me and calling my name. Hesitantly, I got out of my car and began to make my way over to him. He was tall and thin with dull beady eyes and a quirky smile. He seemed friendly, but there was something off about him. "Welcome," he said. I hoped the drive wasn't too bad, I nodded, trying to compose myself and push aside the uneasy feelings. He led me inside the place, which I immediately noticed that it likely was actually an old church, but it had been converted into some sort of makeshift musical instrument museum. There was all kinds of gear aligning the walls, drums, banjos, guitars, and a host of other instruments. I didn't spot the piano though. I turned and asked him where the piano was. "It's downstairs," he replied. I hesitated, something not feeling right with the way he said it. Nonetheless, I followed him down a narrow hallway where a staircase led down below. He grabbed a heavy flashlight before starting down those stairs. As we reached the bottom, he turned to me and gave me a lopsided grin. "It's down here. Don't worry." He shined the flashlight on a small room off to the side. I hesitated, unsure if I should go in, but I was too far in to back out now. We entered the room. The man flicked the lights on, which were dim, just enough to see the piano sitting in the center. The problem was, it looks nothing like the picture in the ad. The wood was chipping, keys were missing from one end of the keyboard, and it was quite a bit smaller than I anticipated. "It's not quite what I was expecting it," I said, trying to sound polite, but my disappointment was clear in my voice. "I'm sorry, it's not quite what you were looking for," he replied. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, watching my every move. I felt like a trapped animal, self-aware and panicky. The whole setup was weird, and I felt like I needed to leave. "Thanks for this, I think I'll pass on it though," I said. I looked over at the man who was still leaning against the wall with a crooked smile on his face. "Is there anything else you'd like to look at?" "Yes." "No, I'm okay." I stuttered, feeling threatened by his tone. "I think that's all for today." I quickly rushed out of the room, and during the dark unlit hallway, I managed to find the stairs and quickly made my way up, leaving out the front door. Even though I had managed to escape, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister going on. Maybe it was the way John had looked at me, or the way he acted, or just the tone in his voice. When I got home, I opened my laptop and looked up the address. Online, it showed a picture of the old church. It was labeled as a historical music museum, opened only on the weekends for viewings. I looked into it further and didn't find any information about them selling anything. My body shook and I closed my laptop. I'd likely escaped something awful. I was already skeptical with sites like Craigslist, but after that I was done. I haven't used Craigslist or even Facebook Marketplace after that night. Because really, when you think about it, you're taking a gamble on your life over some used items. Don't use Craigslist. And if you do, never let your guard down. This happened quite a while back when I was 18 years old. I lived with my folks, even though I had recently moved on from secondary school. I just purchased another PC. Furthermore, after I was finished getting it set up, I posted my old one on Craigslist. It was just 2 years old. Yet in those days that implied it was obsolete. It was a Dell PC with fair specs, and it was very nearly $2,000 fresh out of the box. I was asking for just $500 because more current workstations at the time were significantly better. After posting it on the web, I didn't need to wait long for a reaction. A person named Toby informed me I was inspired by the PC, but I needed to see it first. I needed to set up a chance to meet next week when I would be in Midtown. That way we could meet at a bistro or something like that. At the point when I proposed it, Toby said that he wanted it immediately. Therefore, I consented to allow him to approach my home. I realized gathering in a public place would be more brilliant. Be that as it may, our home was in suburbia, and I didn't have a vehicle. I realized it was apathetic and moronic. Yet I gave him my residence. My folks weren't home, and I figured it'd be a speedy deal and that nothing would turn out badly. Toby appeared sometime thereafter, on a Saturday at around 7 p.m. I saw a more seasoned van maneuver into the carport, and a man got out. In any case, he was in good company. He had one more person with him. The two of them were no less than 30, a lot greater than me. When that's what I saw, I felt somewhat frightened. Something about their presence felt off. In any case, I forgot about the inclination. All things considered, they were only there to check a PC out. I let them in, and we set up in the kitchen. I started showing the PC to Toby, and afterward, his companion promptly requested that I utilize the restroom. I pointed him to the correct heading, which was not far off and down a short passage. Then, at that point, I zeroed in on showing the PC to Toby. Around 10 minutes passed while we were checking it out. I had deleted it in advance, so it was fundamentally running as new. Then, at that point, I unexpectedly understood that the other man hadn't gotten back from the washroom. "Hello, he's your companion." "Good," I asked Toby. "No doubt, you can take some time some of the time, just relax." He consoled me. I tuned in as intently as I could and heard strides that weren't coming from the washroom region. They were coming from higher up. Since there were only the three of us in the house, I realized it was him. The restroom was on the fundamental floor, so there was not a great explanation for him to be up there. That was the point at which I began to overreact inside. However, I attempted to conceal it. I nonchalantly got some information about his companion once more, trusting my anxiety wasn't appearing. His reaction was cold and frightening. He put his hand on my shoulder, not in a well-disposed way, but rather with a ton of strain. He told me not to stress over it. His grasp was fixed agonizingly. Furthermore, at that time I realized this was something other than a deal that turned out badly. We were being ransacked. That was most likely the arrangement all along. Alarm set in that I attempted to keep my poise. I advised Toby to take anything they desired and simply go. However, he didn't give up. His grasp on my shoulder felt hard. It resembled danger. What's more, I began to shake. I realized I needed to move quickly. I figured out how to split away and arbitrarily my father's office on the primary floor, locking the entryway behind me. I left my telephone on the kitchen table, which was a dumb slip-up. Fortunately, however, there was a landline in the workplace where I was, so that saved me. My heart was beating as I dialed 911, making sense of the circumstances for the dispatcher. The man is trusting that the police will show up on the longest day of his life. I could hear the two men stepping around the house, most likely taking anything they might find. They probably realized the police were on their way since they took off in no time and cleaned out the front window as they returned to the van on the carport and dashed away. At the point when I was certain they were gone, I emerged to see what was taken. The main things I saw missing on the fundamental floor were the little television in the kitchen and the PC that I was selling. Notwithstanding, I later figured out that a large portion of my mother's gems were taken, as well as no less than $200 in real money. The police appeared around 10 minutes after the burglars left. They remained for some time. However, at that point they left without making any commitments. He was unacceptable. That was the last I heard from the police about what occurred. I contacted them a few times, yet they never hit me up. At the point when my folks and sister returned home, I needed to make sense of what occurred. They generally thought I was kidding from the outset since I have a dull, funny bone. Yet, when they figured out it was genuine, they were distraught as well. I would gauge the misfortunes at around $3,000, which was a tremendous amount of cash for me at that point. Since it was all my issue, I needed to take care of it. That was essentially my entire summer of work down the channel. It was the last time I met an unusual individual off the web. If I was ever to rehash it, there'd be no chance I would allow them to come to my place. It's a public or private arrangement with no exemptions. For the past few days, I've been alone at home, just me in an empty apartment. A little while ago, my boyfriend got offered a really good job in another state. We've been wanting to move out of Florida for a long time. So when he got the job, we packed up and left town, even though we had already paid rent for a whole month in our old apartment. I didn't get to say bye to some really close friends, I thought to myself. Since we'd already paid the rent for the month, I decided to return by myself and spend a couple more weeks here. Luckily, my job gives me the flexibility to work remotely or from the office in Florida. So even though the apartment feels empty without my boyfriend, I still have a good place to work and keep me busy. When I said the apartment was empty, it wasn't totally true, I admitted. I had a big piece of furniture that I chose to sell instead of taking with us. So I put it up for sale on Craigslist. But here's where things took a weird turn. I put my address on the post, but it didn't stay up for long. Thankfully, the furniture sold on the same day, which was nice. Since I posted the ad yesterday, some strange stuff has been going on. At first, it didn't seem too weird. But you see, I have a cat, so I'm used to hearing noises all the time. Most of the time, it's just him being his mischievous self. He enjoys knocking things over either for fun or to annoy me. One evening, while I was lying on my air mattress, reading my favorite book, I heard a lot of noise coming from the kitchen. Is it just him being noisy again, I wondered. Shrugging it off, I went back to reading, assuming it was just the cat causing a ruckus. Then I remembered, wait, my cat isn't even here. We took him to our new place. So I awkwardly rolled off the air mattress, trying to be as quiet as possible. I went to the kitchen to see what was making the noise, and there I found a few red Solo cups that had been on the counter, now scattered on the floor. I looked around and the only thing I could think of was that the fan was on and it blew them off. That's what I convinced myself to believe so I could sleep, I muttered to myself. But the truth is, those cups had been on the counter all day, and the fan had been running for hours. Why did they suddenly fall now? I tried not to think about it too much. I turned off the lights, read a bit more on my Kindle, and eventually fell asleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange noise I recounted. It sounded like someone was shaking a jar of coins or a set of keys. I'd never heard anything like it before. It seemed like it was coming from outside the apartment, but it was really loud. As soon as I got out of bed, the noise stopped. I turned on all the lights in the house, but I couldn't find where the noise was coming from. So I went back to bed with all the lights still on. It felt safer with the lights on, and I fell asleep quickly. When I woke up this morning, I continued. I didn't notice until I turned on the bathroom light that all the lights in the house were off. No one has ever said I sleepwalk, I pondered, but I couldn't think of any other reason why all the lights were off. The front door is locked with a deadbolt and a regular bolt, I reassured myself. After I showered and dressed, I looked for my keys but couldn't find them in my purse. I thought maybe I accidentally put them in the freezer with the groceries or left them on the kitchen counter, I speculated. But I checked everywhere and they weren't there. I looked in the freezer, microwave, counters, but my keys were nowhere to be found. Then I remembered the jingling sound I heard during the night, I recalled. I checked outside even though it was unlikely for my keys to be there. The only way they could have ended up outside is if they fell out of my bag when I came into the house, I reasoned. I stepped outside and there were my keys on the welcome mat outside my front door, covered in something red. That's when I realized I might have messed up by putting my address on Craigslist for that ad, I admitted. I'll see what happens tonight, but I'll be honest, I confessed. I'm starting to think I might leave early and not stay here for the rest of the rent. I've always been a fan of perusing Craigslist for deals and uncovering unique items that elude mainstream stores. One day, I chanced upon an ad for a vintage record player in impeccable condition. Unable to resist, I promptly fired off an email to the seller to inquire about it. To my surprise, Jack, the seller, replied within minutes, and our conversation swiftly delved into the specifics of the item. Jack appeared friendly and eager to facilitate the sale as we exchanged messages. We agreed to meet later that week at his apartment to finalize the transaction. When the appointed time arrived, I found myself at the apartment complex and made my way to Jack's unit. Upon entering, a sense of unease washed over me. There was an indefinable strangeness lingering in the air. Jack greeted me warmly, albeit with a peculiar energy. He seemed jittery and on edge, though I attributed it to natural anxiety. Upon inspecting the record player, I was delighted to discover it was in even better condition than depicted in the photos. Just as I was prepared to proceed with the purchase, Jack interjected, proposing to show me something intriguing in another room. Though hesitant, I consented, and we ventured to the back of the apartment. In that room, an assortment of seemingly random objects cluttered the space. Jack directed my attention to a large trunk tucked away in a corner, suggesting there might be something of interest inside. As he lifted the lid, a musty odor assailed my senses, causing dizziness. Beneath a tattered white sheet lay an unknown object, but I found myself unable to investigate further, overwhelmed by the noxious scent. Sorry, I managed. The smell is overwhelming. I turned away, intending to leave, but Jack persisted, urging me to take a quick look, promising I wouldn't regret it. Disconcerted by the encounter, I ignored his pleas and swiftly departed the apartment, my head spinning. Struggling to maintain my balance, I hurried to my car, driven by an urgent need to escape. Within moments, I succumbed to the overpowering sensation of lightheadedness, losing consciousness briefly. Upon regaining awareness, I found myself parked in a nearby neighborhood, disoriented and bewildered. The subsequent events are hazy in my memory. Darkness enveloped the sky, and my thoughts were clouded. Somehow I managed to navigate home, gradually emerging from the fog of confusion. As clarity returned, I contacted the authorities, recounting my unsettling experience. The police visited Jack's apartment, yet he denied the existence of any such trunk, and their search yielded nothing incriminating. Despite the lack of tangible evidence, I remained convinced that something was amiss. Perhaps it was paranoia, or maybe the noxious odor was indeed a potent substance emanating from the trunk. Had I lingered longer, the outcome might have been dire. I often go for walks around my neighborhood, but this time I decided to explore new territories. So one day I found out there's a park a few miles from my house. The park is really big, with lots of trees and open spaces. As I was walking around enjoying the sights, I reminisced. I spotted the opening of a trail that seemed different from the ones I usually take. It really caught my eye, so without thinking much, I started exploring it. It was getting darker, probably just after 7 o'clock, I noted, and because of that I wasn't planning on going too far from the main path. The park had a rule that everyone needs to leave by a certain time. Also, I didn't want to be alone in the woods when it got dark. So after walking for a bit, I ended up leaving the main trail and exploring a different part of the park. I must have walked for more than a mile. When I figured it was time to head back home, it was getting darker, and I was worried about getting lost. But just before I decided to go back, I continued. I saw a cabin off to the left in the distance. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to go check it out. I'm really glad I did, I reflected, even though the night turned out to be the scariest night of my life. As I approached the cabin, the daylight seemed to fade away rapidly, making everything dark. I knew I should have left, but I couldn't resist checking out the cabin. I started worrying about how far I'd wandered, I admitted, thinking I might be on someone's private land. This park isn't like a camping site or anything, it's just a regular park. So when I saw there was a cabin, it surprised me. I couldn't tell if someone lives there or what was going on with it, but it clearly seemed like nobody had taken care of it for years. Suddenly I heard a loud noise, I recalled. That sounded like someone hitting something really hard. It scared me, and I almost ran off. But then I took a few steps closer to see where the noise was coming from. When I went to the back of the cabin, I saw a girl about my age in the basement, banging on the window and shouting for help. I could tell right away that something was really bad, I remembered. I ran to her and tried to open the window, but then she looked even more scared and signaled me to be quiet by putting her finger to her lips. I understood right away that she wanted me to stay silent. I saw I couldn't open the window, I explained, and I knew I had to do something fast, so I tried to call the police on my phone, but there was no signal. I felt really scared and didn't know what to do. I went as close to the window as I could and used my phone's notes app to ask her if she was in trouble. She nodded yes, I recounted. Then I told her if she knew if there was anyone else in the cabin or around the property at that moment, but she shook her head, indicating she had no clue. I assured her that I would help her escape and to keep calm. I ran to the front of the cabin, I continued, carefully scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger, and quietly tried to turn the doorknob, but as expected, the front door was already locked. So I walked around the whole cabin trying to open every window, but they were all locked too. So I ran to the woods, searching for something to break a window with. After a while, I found a big stone that looked like it could work. I hurried back to the girl, showed her the stone, and then I threw the stone as hard as I could at the window, breaking the glass completely. She got up, and I grabbed her hand to pull her out, but it didn't work. The window was too small for her to fit through. That's when I did something unexpected, but it was necessary, I admitted. I went to the side of the cabin and smashed one of the big windows with the same stone. I peeked inside to make sure nobody was there, and luckily I didn't see anyone. Then I jumped into the cabin. I carefully checked every room, and it seemed like nobody else was there. Then I went to the basement and found her. Someone had locked her up there alone in a small cage, about 5 by 8 feet. She had lots of bruises, scars, and dried blood on her body. I finally found a big hammer, I recounted, and I used it to break the lock open. I rushed to the girl, but she was so thirsty and hungry that she could hardly move. I helped her upstairs and put some shoes on her that I found near the front door. We hurried as much as we could and went straight to my car. Since we had a long way to go, and she was limping while I had to carry her, it was going to take some time. While we were leaving the front porch, I remembered, we heard a car far away. It was getting dark, so we could hardly see anything. Emily, the girl I rescued, thought it might be the man who kidnapped her. I didn't want to take any risk, so we kept walking. He was getting closer, so we had to hurry to avoid being seen. We moved as fast as we could, considering the situation, and thankfully, he didn't spot us. We were far away by the time he reached the cabin. I'm not sure how long it took him to realize Emily had escaped, I admitted. I took her to the hospital, and she told the police everything she knew about the man and what he did to her. I stayed by her side at the hospital, comforting her until we received assurance from the doctors that she was going to be fine. I never had the chance to get a full report from the police, I confessed, and I don't know where Emily is today, but I hope she is doing well. For me, I still have nightmares about that night. I use various websites like Craigslist for the same reasons everyone else does. You can find expensive items at significantly discounted prices, or even just cheap things for even cheaper. I don't have a ton of money, and using these sites is sometimes essential when it comes to getting things like furniture that's usually really expensive to buy anywhere else. This happened when I was looking around for a dining room table. Ours was really old, and my whole family used it as a place to eat and as a workspace, so it's been through a lot over the years. I went around on Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp, but neither had anything good. Most of them were still expensive, and even when I tried to bargain with a few of the sellers, none of them would budge. So then I went to Craigslist. Around here I think most people use other sites nowadays, but Craigslist still always had the cheapest deals, though they were still somewhat rare to find. But almost as soon as I opened up the site and hit enter on the search bar, a really good listing showed up. It was a very basic wooden dining table that didn't have much wear on it, and the seller posted it for only $100. Compared to the $400–500 everyone else was listing things for, this was a steal. I sent a message saying I'd love to check it out and would be willing to pay the full price. He didn't reply immediately, so I just took a break and hung out with my kids until around 7 when they went to their rooms to get ready for bed. I went back to my laptop and found a response from just a couple minutes ago. It was a very quick few sentences saying he was sorry but the table was going to be thrown out tomorrow morning, but if I really wanted it, I'd have to come by tonight or any time before 5 a.m. tomorrow. It was weird that he'd be willing to sell it at any time during the night, and his reasoning didn't make all that much sense to me. But after some thought, I replied back saying I could pick it up right now. I didn't want to go there really late into the night or super early in the morning, but it was only 7, so I didn't see a problem if I was able to go right now. The man replied quickly, agreeing and sending the address. It was only 10 minutes from my place, so I let my wife know what was going on and where I'd be, then headed out. From context clues, you probably already know that I don't live in a lavish area, so when I say the seller's house was really worn down, I mean it was really worn down. It was small like the others in our area, but the yard was full of trash and random other things, was surrounded by a thin chain link fence. I parked on the side and opened the fence, walking through the yard and up to the door, which was already open. I could hear some people talking and laughing. I peeked inside and gave a light knock on the door. Right away, a man came around the corner and invited me in. He looked like he was in late college, somewhere in his mid-20s. As I stepped inside, though, I couldn't help but notice how disgusting the whole place was. There were beer cans laying around and stains in the carpet. It looked like a really poorly taken care of house where they had probably hosted hundreds of college parties. The man was very laid back, though, casually walking me down the hallway and into the kitchen while talking about how he didn't have room for the table anymore. When we got to the kitchen, there were 2 other men, looking about the same age and standing against the wall, seemingly in the middle of a conversation. Next to them was the table. Somehow it looked almost untouched. I didn't know how that was possible considering the rest of the house. I walked around it and checked to see if it was stable and whatnot, but as I did, the house suddenly went quiet. The 2 talking had stopped and the man selling the table didn't speak either. I looked up, seeing them all staring at me. Did I do something? I asked, looking around at each of them. When my eyes fell on one of the men closest to me, though, I noticed that his pupils were massive, something that only being drugged up could achieve, but what he was on I didn't know. Regardless, in that moment, I knew this wasn't right. Not only was this getting strange, but I didn't want to buy a table that's been in this kind of house and used by these sorts of people. I think I'm going to pass on it. Thank you, though, I said softly. I started walking toward the hallway, but one of them stepped in front of me. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, blocking the way out. Something about the way they were all looking and acting. I could tell that whatever this was planned out, and they likely never meant to sell the table. My face fell to fear, as the anticipation of just standing there, surrounded by these strangers, began to overwhelm me. But then one of them stepped over and whispered something in the other's ear, and they moved aside, still not saying anything. I cautiously walked between them, hurrying down the hallway and out the door. A lot of things went through my head on the drive home. I knew that they were planning something horrible, but what that was and why they ended up letting me go, I'm not so sure of. When I got home, I told my wife, who convinced me to call the police and report it, but they couldn't do anything without anything having happened. So whatever those men were planning, I'll probably never know. I just hope someone else doesn't have to find out. Some might find it odd, but I have a passion for collecting VHS movies. With over 1,000 pieces in my collection, it grows steadily. I dedicate my weekends to scouring thrift stores and online sellers in search of unique and elusive cassettes. Occasionally, I purchase boxes of tapes, often containing personal recordings of forgotten TV shows and family moments deemed insignificant. There was a time when sharing these tapes with my girlfriend was our favorite pastime, cuddling as we watched. Amidst the mundane recordings, I occasionally stumble upon something remarkable. A few years back, while browsing Craigslist, I stumbled upon a box of tapes offered for free to the first taker due to its bulkiness. I seized the opportunity and soon found myself with 44 tapes, many unlabeled or blank, fueling my love for mysteries. Yet they remained untouched in my closet for 9 months as my collection expanded and consumed my spare room. Building a massive shelf to accommodate them all, I meticulously inventoried each tape as I added it to my collection. I recall the evening vividly when I realized I hadn't viewed every tape. I arranged a viewing session with my girlfriend Brittany, who arrived around 7 p.m. After cooking dinner together and indulging in Butterfinger ice cream, we settled in to watch. We started with primetime NBC clips from 1987, followed by 3 HBO movies, and a 1991 wedding video. Brittany particularly enjoyed the latter. As I excused myself for a restroom break and a smoke, Brittany suddenly screamed my name upon my return. Rushing back to her side, I found her in shock, fixated on the TV screen. Confused, I inquired about the cause of her distress, but she remained speechless, only rewinding and replaying the tape. Joining her on the couch, I watched as the seemingly innocuous wedding video took a sinister turn. The recording abruptly shifted to a chilling scene of a man and a woman engaging in intimate acts. Shocked and embarrassed, I was transfixed as the situation escalated into something horrifying. The man began strangling the woman, ignoring her pleas and struggles. Even after she stopped moving, he continued, oblivious to her lifeless state. As the realization dawned on us, panic set in. The man on the tape, now alone and distraught, eventually noticed the camera and violently struck it, ending the recording with static. Brittany and I were left stunned, grappling with the reality of what we had witnessed. Uncertain of our next steps, we decided against immediately involving the authorities, fearing it might be a hoax or worse. Weeks passed with Brittany avoiding me, and when she finally called, she expressed her inability to cope with the trauma, signaling the end of our relationship. Despite my efforts to trace the origin of the tape, contacting the previous owner proved futile. With no leads and the police unable to provide further assistance, I was left to confront the unsettling truth alone. Since then, I've continued my collection, albeit with a sense of unease. The once comforting ritual of watching tapes has become tinged with fear, each unlabeled cassette holding the potential for another disturbing revelation. Collecting these glimpses of others' lives has become a haunting reminder of the darkness that may lurk beneath the surface. I wanted to move out of my old apartment in a few months and was hoping to get some money to help pay for movers. The shoes were nothing special, but I listed them for generous prices, hoping to get them bought quickly. It was some guy whose email had the name John K. in it, and he offered just $5 less than my listing price. It seemed like an unnecessary adjustment to the original price, but I didn't want to keep waiting for more offers, so I wrote him back saying I was okay with that. We set up to meet the following day at 5, in the parking lot of a public gas station in the middle of town. The next day I sent a text and he confirmed that he was on his way, so I left as well and got to the gas station right at 5. They weren't there yet, but there was a lot of traffic on the road, so I figured he'd be late. I sat in my car patiently, and over the course of 30 minutes, the roads cleared up and the sun started coming down, and then John finally pulled in. He drove a small sedan with none of the headlights working and resembling something from a scrapyard. He parked next to me and got out. John looked like he was in his 30s and was a pretty large guy, wearing ripped-up clothes and having long, unkempt hair. He didn't say much, so I brought out the shoes and let him look at them. As he held them, though, and didn't say anything, he kept looking back at the gas station. I don't know what he was looking at, I thought, but after he checked over his shoulder multiple times, I glanced over as well. The gas station was empty aside from one guy putting gas in his car, but otherwise I didn't know what he could be looking at. John was taking his time, though, pointlessly looking over everything multiple times, as if they were some really rare shoes that he was going to drop hundreds on. But these were just some regular sneakers, nothing fancy or rare. Then John looked over his shoulder one more time, just as the car by the pump started to drive away, and all of a sudden, his whole demeanor changed. He stopped looking at the shoes and looked at me. "What else do you have?" he asked abruptly. I looked at him confused. "Those are the only shoes I brought. I didn't know you were interested in others." His eyes went cold as he stepped past me and put his hand on my car door, trying to open it. It was locked, I explained. John immediately looked at me and told me to unlock it. His voice was deep and strict, like it was a threat if I didn't. I kind of just stared at him and tried to wrap my head around this, thinking of what the best course of action would be, but in the moment, there's just no time to really think through options. I unlocked the door, knowing at most all he could take was a couple random bills I had in the front, but then he said something that I was not expecting at all. Get in, he opened the passenger door and told me again. I stood there, even more taken aback, but now starting to get way more worried about where this was going. I looked behind me, hoping someone else was here, but the gas station was empty. No people or cars anywhere in sight. John grabbed my arm and pulled me over to the door, taking the keys from me and aggressively shoving me into the car while throwing a few punches landing on the right side of my face. I immediately tried to get up, but John slammed the door against my head, making my vision go blurry and everything just sort of fading in and out. I heard him start walking around the car as if he was going to the driver's side, but then he suddenly turned around and sprinted back to his truck. I was still out of it and barely remember anything else, but I guess someone pulled in at the perfect time and confronted John, scaring him away. If they hadn't have helped me and John was able to get in and presumably drive away, I don't know what would have happened. Assuming his car was either stolen or untraceable to his name, then stealing my car and abducting me would have left no trace of our interaction, giving him days, if not weeks, to do whatever it was he planned before anyone would even come looking. At 23, I was on the hunt for a studio apartment to rent. Fresh out of college, I had next to no money, barely scraping by on a bit more than minimum wage. My primary focus was finding the cheapest possible option available. Initially, I searched for both one-bedroom apartments and studios. However, as the weeks went by, it became increasingly clear that those options were simply not financially feasible. Reluctantly, I turned to Craigslist, despite its less than stellar reputation. One of my friends had a positive experience and recommended it, so I decided to give it a shot. On the first day of browsing Craigslist, I didn't come across anything suitable, though the sheer volume of listings gave me a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, none of them matched my location or price requirements. It was around the third or fourth day of searching that I stumbled upon a new listing that caught my attention. Located a few miles away, it was for a studio in a small apartment building. Despite the low-quality, pixelated pictures, I decided to investigate further, intrigued by the promising details. I reached out to the owner, who responded promptly, and we arranged a tour for later that evening at 7. In our brief exchange, nothing struck me as out of the ordinary about the owner. His messages were professional, and he appeared eager to show me the place. A couple of hours later, I got into my car and started driving over to the address he sent me. It's worth noting that I was aware beforehand that this wasn't a particularly nice area of our city, but it was the most affordable. Honestly, I didn't think it was too bad, although looking back, perhaps I was just being naive because it seemed like my only option. Upon arriving, I pulled up to a rather old-looking apartment building. Parking on the side of the street, I texted the man to let him know I had arrived, then proceeded to walk up to the front door. Not spotting the man anywhere, I buzzed the room and waited for a few seconds before the door unlocked. Stepping inside, I was greeted by a staircase in the middle and 2 rooms on either side. Before I could even glance at the room numbers, a voice echoed from somewhere above the staircase, informing me that they were on the 3rd floor. Assuming the man was addressing me, I began ascending the stairs. However, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease at his absence from the door, especially considering how professional he had been in our text exchanges. Upon reaching the top of the steps, I found myself in a small hallway with 2 doors, one of which was open. I walked over and peered inside, only to find a man standing a few feet away, looking back at me. He greeted me warmly, shook my hand, and invited me inside. Yet my confusion was immediate. The place was clearly inhabited, with a couch, TV, chairs, and even food on the counters. It was unmistakably lived in. "Does someone else live here?" I asked kindly. The man quickly replied with a short laugh and said, "No one lived here and everything would be gone by tomorrow." I smiled and said, "Okay, though that response didn't sit right with me." He started leading me further in, pointing out features of the place. But it suddenly dawned on me that this wasn't even a studio. There were multiple doors, surely leading to other rooms. This was at least a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. and there was no way the price could be what he said it was. It seemed like he noticed my suspicions as he stopped what he was saying and moved toward the hallway. He opened one of the doors that clearly led to a bedroom and started telling me to take a look inside. But before I could answer, we were interrupted when my phone chimed. I pulled it out of my pocket and checked who it was. My face went pale, seeing it was from the man from Craigslist asking where I was. I looked up in horror, realizing what had happened, and I could tell that whoever this guy was in front of me knew that I'd figured it out. This terrifying moment passed, and the guy didn't move or say anything. He just stood and looked at me with a blank stare. After a moment, I hurried out of there and down the stairs, not hearing the guy follow. I got in my car and left, feeling horrified. I never even texted the actual man back, as I was no longer interested in staying anywhere near that place. And I didn't know if maybe he was in on it too, somehow. But whoever that guy was who lured me into his home was so close to being able to probably abduct me. I don't know. And I don't even want to know. But I never opened Craigslist again after that night. I was on Craigslist for the first time in probably 5 years, I thought to myself, realizing I'd forgotten about the site. I'd never had any need or use for it and hadn't really heard about it lately. But due to my moving situation, I needed to get rid of a bunch of random things. I initially called a junk removal company, hoping they would just take everything. However, their estimate was over $400 for getting rid of just a couple of things. That's when I turned to Craigslist. I put up a listing for free stuff and included pictures of all the things I was giving away. Maybe I just didn't understand how it works nowadays, but I thought I'd get a lot of responses from people wanting to pick up free stuff. However, I barely got any, and the ones that did respond to the listing ended up ghosting me after a couple of texts. Then, about a week after making the listing, a man who introduced himself as KJ reached out. He said he wanted to pick up my couch and was flexible about the day. I really thought this was going to be the same as all the other people who had reached out, so I didn't put much effort into getting him to actually come pick up the couch. I let him know that I worked between 9 and 5, so if he wanted to pick it up, he could just let me know. Again, I didn't think he'd actually come. But sure enough, in the morning before work, he sent me a text saying he'd like to swing by tonight. I told him that was great, I said, expressing my approval. As I left work that night, I sent him my address. The drive home was only about 20 minutes, but I hoped he would come sooner rather than later because I didn't want to waste my night waiting for him. So if he didn't end up showing, I could do something else. When I pulled into my driveway, a car was parked on the curb right next to my house, but nobody was in it. It was the only car parked on the whole street, so it seemed clear that they were at my house. Thinking it was KJ, I quickly got out and ran to my front door, but he wasn't there. It crossed my mind that this could be just some crazy coincidence, and the car might be for someone else's house, but I wasn't convinced. I got inside and sent a text to KJ asking what his ETA was. Then I stood by the window and looked outside. After 10 or so minutes, I still hadn't gotten a response, and I didn't see anyone outside either. So I calmed myself down and turned away from the window. I went to the kitchen, pouring myself a drink and just standing there when a small thud sounded from upstairs. Unaware of what it was, I put my drink down and listened. There were a few seconds of silence. Then suddenly, heavy footsteps were running down the stairs. I was so caught off guard. I just stood where I was and stared down the hallway as a man appeared at the other end, running right to the front door. He swung it open and ran out. And when I made it to the front, he was already driving away in that car that was parked on the curb. I was still stunned, trying to process what happened, because it was all so sudden and quick. Eventually, I got my phone out and called the police, then tried calling KJ, but he didn't pick up, which meant to me that it was definitely him who had broken in. When the police investigated, they found that KJ's phone wasn't registered to a name or address. So we were back to square one. Nothing ever did come of it, despite me trying multiple times to get the police back on the case. As far as I know, nothing was stolen. So maybe he didn't have enough time, or he was waiting for me. Maybe that thud I heard was him accidentally giving himself away. So he took his chance to run now that he didn't have the element of surprise on me. But whatever really happened, all I can do is hope that he never comes back. That night changed everything. Now every shadow holds their sinister secrets. In 2018, I experienced a divorce that left me with virtually nothing. I relocated to a small home, but it was empty. I lacked furniture, appliances, everything, really. The task of furnishing my place seemed daunting, particularly from a financial standpoint. So I saw this as an opportunity to find discounted items on Craigslist. My main focus was on big-ticket items like a couch and a TV. Finding deals didn't prove difficult. I reached out to a few sellers and made some purchases. During this process, I came across a listing for a TV stand posted for $40. It looked like a typical wooden TV stand. The seller, Matt, however, had specific conditions for pickup. He insisted it had to be after 9 on weekdays due to his work schedule, ruling out weekends entirely. While this arrangement still suited me, I found his strictness somewhat peculiar. I assumed this specificity was why the item hadn't been sold yet. I agreed to pick up the TV stand on a Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. On the appointed day, I confirmed with Matt and received his address. The town he lived in was unfamiliar to me, only mentioned in passing conversations. Soon I understood why. Most of the homes were dilapidated, with aging infrastructure. Even the streetlights were mostly non-functional. Pulling up to Matt's house didn't ease my unease. It matched the rundown appearance of the surrounding homes, illuminated only by a dim hallway light. I counted out $40 and tucked the bills into my pocket before stepping out of my car and onto his porch. As I waited for him to answer the doorbell, I glanced around his yard. It was cluttered with various items, garden statues, eclectic decorations scattered about. The porch itself was adorned with knickknacks and oddities. Then he opened the door. Matt was a tall and skinnier-looking man, probably in his 40s. I observed. He wore a tired expression, as if he hadn't slept in days. As he welcomed me inside, I could smell booze on his breath. If I'd known beforehand that this was who I'd be buying from, I never even would have come here, I thought, but it was too late for that now. As we walked down the hall, stuff was scattered all around the house. It wasn't like a hoarder's home you'd see on TV, but more like an abandoned house that had been trashed by random teenagers. When we reached the living room in the back of the house, he pointed at the TV stand. The room was barely lit, making it hard to see the condition it was in. "Any chance you could turn on the light for me?" I asked politely. Matt didn't respond, but walked over to the wall and flicked on a small lamp in the corner. It was around this time that I got a really weird feeling that something was wrong. And before I even got to look at the TV stand, I heard someone else behind me. Another man had come around the corner, standing next to Matt. He didn't say hello or anything, just watched me. I was really unsure what to make of this and didn't want to overreact right away, but I was also getting really uncomfortable as that eerie feeling only grew larger. I was standing there trying to think of what to say or do, but then Matt walked past me and stood in front of the TV stand. They were now on either side of me, facing me and not speaking. Several long seconds passed as nobody spoke or moved. Before I quickly walked past the other guy and down the hallway toward the front door, I made a hasty exit. As I left, I heard them laughing in the room behind me, like this was funny, and as I got halfway to my car, the front doors slammed shut. I can't even find any reasons for what occurred that night or what those two guys were trying to do. Maybe it was just some sick joke they were pulling, trying to get me to freak out, or maybe it was something more sinister. I don't plan on finding out though.